Hello and welcome to the daily briefing for Sunday, the 12th of April 2026. Today we cover a record-breaking turnout in Hungary's most contested election in decades, the opening of polls in BENIN amid a worsening security crisis, Trump's announcement of a US blockade of Hormuz, and escalating unrest in Ireland. But first, the diplomacy in Islamabad has hit a wall. The US delegation, led by Vice President J.D. Vance, left Pakistan this morning at around 7 a.m. local time without reaching a deal with Iran after a marathon 21 hours of talks. In a short news conference after the talks, Vance said that the US has put forward its final and best offer. He also added that the US needs to see an, quote, affirmative commitment, unquote, from Tehran that it would not develop nuclear weapons. Iran's parliamentary speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who led Iran's negotiating team, wrote that the US failed to gain the trust of the Iranian delegation in this round of negotiations. According to Al Jazeera, the Iranian Tasnim news agency has quoted an informed source as saying that Iran is in no hurry to negotiate. Upon the failure of the talks at around 11 a.m. Eastern Time, Trump announced in a Truth Social post that the US Navy would begin blockading the shipping channel effective immediately. According to the post, President Trump has ordered the US Navy to interdict every ship that has paid a toll to Iran for safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. For context, in recent weeks, reports have surfaced that Iran is charging up to $2 million per vessel for safe passage through the strait. We'll again update you tomorrow on the latest developments in the Middle East. We move to Europe now, where the polls have closed in Hungary's most competitive general election in a decade, with the incumbent Prime Minister Viktor Orban facing his biggest electoral challenge after 16 years in power. This year's election has seen a turnout rate of 77.8%, the highest voter participation since Hungary's transition to democracy in the 1990s. Orban is up against a former ally, the 45-year-old centre-right Peter Magyar, who resigned from Orban's government in February 2024 in protest of Hungary's president pardoning a man convicted of helping cover up sexual abuse in a state-run children's home. Opinion polls over the last 2 weeks have suggested Orban's Fidesz party is trailing the centre-right opposition TISA party. Since his resignation, Magyar has been a staunch critic of the Orban-Fidesz party's systemic corruption in Hungary and Hungary's government stance on the EU. For context, Hungary remains jointly ranked with Bulgaria as the most corrupt country in the European Union for the fourth consecutive year, according to the Transparency International 2025 Corruption Perceptions Index. Due to systemic corruption, conflict of interest concerns, and a lack of judicial independence, the EU continues to suspend over 6 billion euros in funding for Budapest. Viktor Orban is widely believed to have systematically dismantled checks and balances in Hungary since 2010, transforming the country into what experts call a hybrid regime. According to the BBC, Orban's Fidesz party is trailing Peter Magyar's TISA party in the final opinion polls, which suggests that TISA may end up with around 132 to 135 seats, just over or under the 133 it needs for a two-thirds majority. We'll keep you updated on the election results and its consequences in the coming days. We stay in Europe, where the Irish government has announced a 505 million euros in fuel cost measures after days of protest related to the surge in fuel prices. By Saturday, over a third of Ireland's 1,500 service stations had run dry due to fuel shortage. The demonstrations began on April 7, led primarily by farmers and transport-dependent workers responding to sharply rising fuel prices driven by the Middle East conflict and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Over the days, the protest intensified into blockades of multiple key roads and facilities, including the Whittage refinery, Ireland's only oil refinery. Overnight, Gardaí, the Irish police, cleared multiple blockades in a major operation, making arrests in the process. The government has now announced a €505 million in full cost relief measures, including a direct cash grant scheme for licensed haulage and transport firms in Ireland. Dublin is also pursuing Brussels for an exemption from EU minimum fuel tax rules. The Prime Minister called the protest as, quote, act of national sabotage, unquote. His Justice Minister went further, accusing actors of manipulating protesters, especially naming British far-right activist Tommy Robertson. Voters in Benin cast ballots today to choose a successor to President Patrice Talon, who is stepping down after his 2 terms in power. His decade-long rule leaves behind a mixed legacy of economic growth, a growing jihadist insurgency in the north, and a sustained crackdown on opposition and critics. The ruling party-supported candidate, Ghani, is all but certain to win. The main opposition party, Les Democrates, or the Democrats, was barred from the ballot, and Talon's allies swept all 109 parliamentary seats in January after an electoral threshold critics say was engineered to keep rivals out. Turnout has been visibly low in the presidential election as well. The incoming president inherits 7% economic growth on paper, but widespread poverty, a worsening jihadist insurgency, and a failed coup just 4 months ago are issues that he will have to deal with. Provisional results are expected on Tuesday. In other news from around the world, polls close in Peru with no single candidate crossing the 50% threshold required to win the election outright. A runoff between the top 2 finishers is almost certain, scheduled for June 7th. Results are still coming in. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has returned from Singapore after an official visit covering defence cooperation and trade amid growing regional tensions. Australia and Singapore have agreed to make every effort to meet each other's energy needs as conflict in the Middle East continues. Saudi Arabia has confirmed full restoration of the east-west crude oil pipeline, which bypasses the Strait of Hormuz entirely and allows the kingdom to transport oil across the Arabian Peninsula. It is significant news as the US blockade of the Strait of Hormuz takes effect. That's all for today's briefing. This was a Northtown Daily production hosted by Hussein Zuhair Zuhan and written and produced by Maruf Tanveer and Hussein Zuhair Zuhan. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back tomorrow with results from Hungary and the latest on the Middle East.